The Lord Good morning. Welcome to our study. My name is Clint McElroy, and today we'll be studying out of 1 Samuel chapter 1. Today we'll be studying out of 1 Samuel chapter 1, and it would be remiss if we didn't go back and kind of look at where the children of Israel are as a people, coming from the earlier parts of the Bible to this point. Of course, we know Moses gave the law to the people of Israel in Exodus, and then there was a period of wandering in the wilderness because of the disobedience and unbelief of the people. And then there was the claiming of the promised land as recounted in Joshua. And we see that the people who were beginning to fall away from the following of the Lord's direction as they had understood it in the wanderings in the wilderness. We see repeatedly throughout the book of Judges a comment that the people of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, turning to the idols of the people of the land of Canaan, who still occupied portions of the land of Canaan because the children of Israel did not complete their task of wiping them out when they took the promised land. It was an unseemly task going in and killing so many people that the Lord had brought judgment upon, and they quit doing it after a period of time. It was just something that they no longer had a stomach for, and they accepted what they had taken as their inheritance, and it was a problem from that point on. The people of the land maintained their idolatrous worship, and it was an influence on the people of Israel to sin against God repeatedly throughout their history. And it's recorded in Judges that was repeatedly the case, and judges would rise up to deliver them from their oppression that was imposed on them by their disbelief. And then the final verse of Judges is most telling, I think, and it's, again, something that is repeated throughout the book of Judges. But in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's the way the people behaved themselves. Some did right in their own eyes by obeying the word of the Lord, as we see in the first chapter of Samuel. Some did what was right in their own eyes by doing outlandishly crazy things that were inappropriate. And we'll see some of that down the road as well. It's a warning about the way we interpret God's will for us. Our own understanding is sometimes laxed if we're not informed correctly. And the people of Israel had no way of maintaining that information once they gave up the Scriptures. The Scriptures were not commonly available to them as they were later. And we should remember that in our own lives. We have an abundance of exposure to Scripture. We can find it anywhere we want to. It's not kept from us by any organization or government. It's right there handy, and we ignore it. A privilege that was not shared by those at that time. We have it, and we should take advantage of it. Study the Word to show yourself approved. Study the Word to prepare yourself to do those things that the Lord would have us to do, the correct things that He would have us to do, the things that are in accordance with His will. The people of Israel didn't learn that lesson. At least all of them didn't, and they repeatedly faced trials and tribulations because of it. We're going to get into the first chapter of 1 Samuel, and we're going to see a righteous man who was trying to do what was good at this period of time that leads us on into the rest of the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 1, beginning at verse 1. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. Verse 4, and whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife, and and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely, to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Verse 8. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord, and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. Verse 12. And it happened, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you. Verse 15. But Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. Verse 17. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him. And she said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Verse 19. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked for him from the Lord. Verse 21. Now the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, Not until the child is weaned. Then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. Verse 23. So Elkanah her husband said to her, Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. Verse 24. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. So they worshiped the Lord there. Okay, so in 1 Samuel we see the story of the birth of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 1. It's interesting. This story is very interesting to me on a number of levels, and it's pretty straightforward, but I want to go over a few things just in review. So Elkanah is a Levite, and that's very important. He's a Levite who is living in the land of Ephraim, the Ephraim inheritance land, somewhere, I believe, to the west of Jerusalem. He had 2 wives, Peninnah and Hannah, and Peninnah had children by him, and Hannah was apparently barren. This is one of the first things that's striking about this story. Their relationship is one of envy and hostility, and it is not necessarily the way you might expect it to be. Maybe it's because I perceive it that way, but in this case, you would expect that Hannah would be envious of Peninnah. It is the other way around. That Peninnah, though she had born children for Elkanah, she was envious of Elkanah's love for Hannah, and this it seems strange to me. And again, I think it's strange to Elkanah. I think he has struggled with that as well. He seems to be almost oblivious to the abusive nature that Peninnah was exhibiting toward Hannah. She was obviously distressed in their relationship, and instead of picking up on that, the causes for that, he kind of seemed to be at a loss as to what was causing it. Elkanah was devout in his following of the law. He was going about doing those things that the Lord had required of the people of Israel. As a Levite, he had no land inheritance, specifically the way that the other tribes did. But the Levites did have cities, and they did have lands around those cities that could be used to raise cattle for sacrifices. And it's not clear exactly what his status was in that way, but he was presenting himself to make the proper offering in the proper way. Of course, Jerusalem was not set up as the place of worship at this time, and when they presented themselves at Shiloh, and it talks about briefly, and we're going to talk a lot more about Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas. Hophni and Phinehas are acting in roles of priests, and Eli is the high priest at that time. And we're going to see later some of that story play out. Now, Hannah was distressed, and she goes about expressing that grief, the grief that she had about not having had children before the tabernacle of the Lord. And in that process, again, she's kind of misunderstood by Eli, who's sitting there nearby as she presents herself to pray before the Lord at the tabernacle. She makes an endearing plea to the Lord. It's very interesting in its nature as well. And Eli is watching her, and he sees that she's moving her lips, and he interprets the lack of sound coming from her lips as an indication that she's somehow inebriated. And he treats her as such, but she makes a plea in protest, saying that she is in fact not inebriated, but that she's bringing this burden that she's carried to God. And Eli gives her this blessing in verse 17, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him." It's not made plain in the passage that it's the case, but because Eli is the high priest and he's acting as the high priest in this exchange, his blessing may have played a role in the Lord answering that prayer. Again, it's not plainly stated that that's the case, but Hannah goes forth from that point, and there are relations between her and Elkanah, and she does in fact bear the child Samuel as a result of the situation of that pregnancy. According to the process, as I understand it in the law, the firstborn child was dedicated to God. So Hannah's firstborn would have been dedicated to service to God anyway, but she, as part of the agreement or the negotiation she made in her prayer with God, had said that she would give up Samuel to the Lord in his service. So the next time they went up to make offerings in Shiloh, she was still nursing Samuel, and apparently she didn't want to take the child to give him up to service to God until he was weaned properly. So that tells you kind of the nature of their expectation toward that commitment to God and her commitment to God through the vow that she made in prayer. She did make this one reservation, and she kept him with her until he was weaned. Now, it's not clear to me in the text whether that's the same year or another year or another time altogether. It's so quickly stated that it's almost like as he was in Shiloh making that offering, she weaned the child and took him up there. But it's not clear to me, and I wouldn't insist that someone take it that way at all. It would seem to me that it would actually have to be some other way, that it would be another time altogether. She took him up along with the requisite offering and dedicated him to the Lord and left him there with Eli. Now in verse 28, therefore I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. That's different, again, from my understanding of the law. The law would indicate to me that the child would be dedicated to the Lord. The firstborn would be dedicated to the Lord and redeemed at the cost of a sacrifice. And maybe that's where it came in. Instead of taking the sacrifice and expecting him to be returned, he was committed to God indefinitely for perpetuity's sake, in perpetuity. So the law is kind of strange in that way. Firstborns were required to be given over to God, but they could be redeemed at a price, a certain price, and then come back to the family. So it's just a little bit of exposure here in our first chapter to the nature of the situation in Israel, the nature of Elkanah, Samuel's family, his background, where Hannah was coming from as Samuel's mother. And we'll go on next time and talk further about the youth of Samuel. We may attempt to cover multiple chapters because some of it's just straight story. There's not a lot to add to what's there as far as interpretation or application goes. As far as application here, I don't know what to make of an application here except as the example goes. When we make commitments to God, we should follow through with those commitments. We shouldn't expect answers to prayers when we make a petition to God, and when we have those answers, we need to behave accordingly. And the nature of Elkanah's relationship with God, even in the face of a land of Israel where men were at best acting in their own understanding, and at worst they were doing evil on the side of the Lord, is also very important. And as we will see later, that relationship in light of the nature of Eli's priesthood and that of his sons is also very important. So I hope you've I hope you've been able to take something away from today's study, and I hope that we can see you today at services, which will be at 10 a.m. Hope to see you there. Have a blessed week.
I will call upon the Lord. I will call upon the Lord. Who is worthy to be praised? Who is worthy to be praised? So shall I be saved from my enemies. Saved from my enemies. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. Jesus Christ, He died for me. Jesus Christ, He died for me. And He took away my sin. I will live with Him for eternity. I know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock. rock and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I know